Good afternoon and welcome to today's OR Today webinar, an OR's Guide to Sterile Packaging. Today we are joined by Melinda Alamari, Clinical Education Specialist, and Kevin Anderson, Clinical Education Coordinator, both of Healthmark Industries. OR Today's webinars would like to thank today's sponsor, Healthmark Industries. Since 1969, Healthmark Industries has developed and marketed innovative solutions to aid healthcare facilities in the delivery of surgical instruments and other life-saving medical devices to patients. Healthmark Industries' mission is to continue to innovate, support and serve the healthcare provider industry and support services that make it possible to deliver quality healthcare. Visit hmark.com for more information. Today's webinar is eligible for one continuing education hour. You can obtain your certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your 1CE certificate, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. We'll have a live Q&A at the end of today's presentation, so please feel free to submit your questions anytime using the questions feature on your webinar dashboard. Let's kick off today's webinar by giving away one of our brand new OR Today Live lunch bags to the attendee that can tell me the answer to the following trivia question. What is the name of the nurse who founded the American Red Cross? Answer now using the questions feature on your dashboard, and I'll reveal the answer at the end of the webinar. As I mentioned earlier, our presenters today are Melinda Alamari and Kevin Anderson, both of Healthmark Industries. Melinda, you may begin whenever you're ready.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So let us get started. Like was said, my name is Melinda Alamari. I'm the Clinical Education Specialist for Healthmark, and my cohort here is Kevin Anderson, who also is a Clinical Education Specialist for Healthmark. So today we're going to be talking about an OR's Guide to Sterile Packaging. Okay. Sorry, it won't. Okay, there we go. So disclosures, like we said, we are Healthmark employees, and we are involved in manufacturing, distribution of medical products and healthcare facilities and healthcare professionals. All opinions are those of the presenters. So Healthmark's policy and philosophy is high on education. Presentation is part of a commitment to education to our customers. And so that is our goal, is to help educate the customers as much as possible and to ensure that everyone is following standards, regulations, and recommendations. So our objectives of this webinar is going to be to define sterile packaging terminology, explain the main differences between containment devices, review transport and placement considerations for sterile items, demonstrate key inspection points for sterile barriers in the operating room. So like we said, with our objectives, the goal of this webinar is really to help the end users who have to open packages and deal with sterile packages in the operating room, to ensure that you guys know and you know what to look for, you understand what is involved with packaging, and you're able to speak to it so that when you do see something wrong, you're able to call it out and help re-educate the staff. So let's start with some definitions. So we're going to talk about sterile barrier systems. This is the minimum package that prevents ingress of microorganisms and allows aseptic presentation of the product at the point of use. This is per AAMI and ISO standards. Then we have our packaging system, which is a combination of sterile barrier system and protective packaging. Our containment device, which is an instrument case, cassette, or organizing tray intended for use in healthcare facilities for purpose of containing reusable medical device for sterilization. Event related, sterility maintenance. And so this is sterility maintenance that is not based on expiration date, but rather on factors such as quality of the packaging material, the storage conditions and method of condition or transport, and the amount of conditions of handling. So the first thing we're going to jump into, we're going to talk about labeling. And so labeling is a key factor when we're talking about packaging. Having the right information on the label is imperative, especially when you are in a rush, you're trying to do a turnover, the surgeon's screaming, I want this and I want that, we all have been there, right? And you're running out trying to look for something. And if the package isn't labeled or it's not labeled correctly, you're searching for too long, right? And you need to get back to your patient, or as a tech, you're trying to turn over the room. So want to make sure labeling is done correctly. So Amy talks about things that should be part of your labeling process, right? And so in Amy, they say these are some of the factors that should be part of your label. Be visible and legible. So whatever you're labeling and you're utilizing to label, no fancy cursive or calligraphy, right? We need to make sure that everybody can read it, it's legible, and it's right there for people to see. It needs to be written when you're doing stuff for like a peel pouch, you're labeling a peel pouch, as you can see in our picture there. The label information needs to be written on the non-porous side of the pouch. So that is the plastic side of the pouch, the clear plastic side of the pouch. Should not be written on the paper side. Now, some manufacturers for peel pouches have validated that writing can be done at the very bottom of this picture. You can see that white strip. However, it needs to be checked that that is a validation per that manufacturer's IFU. Needs to be written on indicator tape or a fixed label. So whichever one your system uses, indicator tapes, your labels, and then include dates, sterilizer, and load number. So this is usually accomplished by a load sticker. So every pouch should have a load sticker on, or every wrapped item or every container. There needs to be a load sticker affixed to that item, and that is mainly for recall purposes. So if anything happens with sterilizer number 5, we can go back and pull all those trays, and it just helps us find those items. It also needs to include a description of the contents. So it can't just say, I don't know, let's say a shoulder tray, right? So we need to know it's a, Synthy shoulder tray, blah, blah, blah. So make sure that the description really defines what's inside that package. And then a person responsible for packaging, their initials need to be on it. So making sure that those items are part of that labeling process. And then also missing items. You can see this lovely picture. We've got a whole slew of stuff that is missing. Now this is a Synthes tray that was missing some screws and stuff. So each screw is labeled and printed out that it was missing, which is fantastic, right? But now you've got like all these stickers with everything missing. But the point is everything needs to be accounted for and labeled. Monitoring our sterilization process. So the understanding of monitoring the sterilization process from the OR's perspective, as a former surgical tech, knowing what I'm looking for as far as my packaging and also far as my indicators and what needs to happen, just kind of helps give me a better understanding of where I need to place my emphasis on and look, and make sure that I'm looking in the correct places and I am doing the correct process. And if I see something out of place, or if I need a turnover, I know what the process needs to be. So there are 4 types of monitoring for sterilization: administrative monitoring, physical monitors, chemical monitors, and biological. When we talk about administrative monitoring, we're really talking about like your policies, your procedures, your sterilization record audits. Those are more administrative monitoring. Does your policies line up with the practice of your staff and your procedures? We also have physical monitors. So physical monitor would be your gauges on your machines. your printouts on your machines. These are huge, they're key, making sure that staff really understand how to read that printout. This is really key if you are in the operating room and you're doing IUSS for emergency situations and you're processing a tray. And if you are the person from the OR who has to go and read out this printout, understanding what you're looking for. So everybody needs to make sure that they know what they're looking for, and that's usually the three parameters that make steam happen: time, temperature, and pressure. And so just ensuring staff are educated on that. Biologicals. So biologicals have advanced tremendously since I started, so I'm not going to date myself as like dinosaurs, I don't know. But when when I started, biologicals were, 48-hour readout, 24-hour readout. When we got to 3-hour readout, we were like, wow, this is amazing. um and then, now it's a 28-minute readout for the most part. I mean, that's just crazy, right? And so by the time that tray is cool, by the time that biological's read, the tray's not even cool yet. So that's a whole nother issue, right? But the advancement is just amazing what has come with biologicals. So biological indicators are the only sterilization process monitoring device that provide a direct measurement of lethality of the process, meaning your chemical indicators are great indicators, but that does not state that yes, sterility happened. Your biological is the one that tells you sterility happened. We have chemical indicators. So we have 6 different types of chemical indicators. So understanding this as well. Type 1 chemical indicator. This is tape, your locks on the outside, your dots on your filters, those outside indicators. And the purpose of these is just to show you and say, yes, this went through a sterilization process and this one did not. So making sure that you understand that, right? So if we see tape on the inside of trays, shouldn't be going inside because it's not really validated to go on the inside of a tray. It's an outside chemical indicator. Um, Indicators for use of specific tests, that's a Bowie Dick, that's a type 2. So these are used to test our machines on a daily basis or whenever the day they're in use. Your type 3 is a single critical process variable. Type 4 is a multi-critical. Type 5, these are the ones that you see the most in your trays. This one is so special, we gave it a name. We named it an integrator, right? So the other ones were like, yeah, this is my kid number 1, my kid number 2, number 3. Now, okay, now this one, we like this one, we're going to name it an integrator, right? And so what makes this one so special is that this runs parallel to your biological. It doesn't replace your biological, but it runs parallel. And because we have these indicators in our trays and in our test packs, we can release a tray, if it's cool, to the operating room prior to that biological being read out. So this was really important when we had 24-hour biologicals, right? This was really important when we had a 3-hour biological. So now your biologicals are done before the situation happens. So type 6 is your emulating indicator. And so this one I like to call the freaky little indicator because it's only good for certain sterilization parameters. So you have to run it on a 270 cycle for 5 minutes or 10 minutes, whatever your actual indicator states on there. You have to make sure you're following that time frame, and that indicator has to be in that tray for that cycle. So when we talk about our indicators, a key factor that we need to know and understand is placement of your indicator. So if you are going to containerize a tray, so the tray is going into a container, you need to have 2 indicators at the very bottom of your tray and in the opposite corners. If you're going to put that into, you're going to wrap that tray, same tray, but you're going to wrap it, 1 indicator in the center. And the reason for this is because these are the most resistant areas for steam penetration to reach, or sterilant penetration, right? So if I have a container that has a filter, steam has to get in that filter and circulate around to the corners. We want to make sure that's happening in the corners. If I have a wrap, I've got multiple layers right in the center, and the steam has to penetrate through all those layers. So that's the most resistant area. So you can find this information with your IFUs for your indicators. So 3M has this nice little chart here where it talks about placement of your indicators and where they should be. The other key point is containment devices. So anytime you have like a screw caddy or a bag, those are all considered containment devices, and every one should have an indicator on the inside of that item. If you cannot fit it on the inside, we know how tight those little screw caddies can be. You know, pick it up, put it underneath it, somewhere around in that vicinity as best as you can get it. So wrap is considered an outside containment device. We just talked about little containment devices like screw caddies and stuff, but wrap's considered an outside containment device, just like peel pouches and rigid containers. Those three things are outside containment devices. And outside containment devices are to never be used on the inside, on an inside containment device. So meaning I can't take a wrap like you see in this picture and wrap it around a glass syringe to protect it and then put it into a pouch. I can't take a peel pouch and use it to separate forceps and put it inside a rigid container or a wrap tray. Or I don't know why they did this, but I've seen people actually wrap a rigid container. Whatever, right? But no, I can't do that. So the other thing is no IFU. If you have no IFU, no deal, right? No dice, no deal. So if you're processing items that there is no IFU for, this is a no-no, right? So all your items must have an IFU. So your instructions for use, if an IFU cannot be obtained, the item should not be processed. This includes containment devices. So you can see this little black case at the bottom. This is where 30-degree large lens for eye microscope came in, and it was being processed actually inside the container that was just used to protect it for shipping and storage. So big problem there, right? And then you have like stuff like razor blades and Q-tips that are being processed. And, you know, we all have those things that maybe surgeons bring in and they're like, hey, can you process this for me? I just went to Home Depot and got some washers to act as, you know, nipple sizers now, right? Like, I mean, we've all experienced these different situations, which if there's no IFU, it cannot be done. One of the big ones we see, this guy, right? The spoons for cysto coming in. I mean, and then, okay, we're all guilty of it. Before I knew any better, you know, you run out of a spoon, you don't have any. What do? Go down to the cafeteria and get spoons and then sterilize them, right? So not allowed. There's no IFU for it. You cannot process it. All right, Kevin, you're up.
All right, so we're gonna get into peel pouches a little bit deeper for you, so you can kind of have some ideas what to look for, what not to, you know, what you want to maybe stop the line for, things like that. So go ahead and move on to the next slide. We're gonna have lots of examples for you because one of the things that we do that you may or may not know of is that we do go around and do consultative services, and so we get a lot of ideas of what's going on in the field, and we want to share those with you because not everyone else has that opportunity, and so we want to make sure people are aware of these things and know to look for it, especially for you guys who do work at the point of use. You know, your scrub techs, scrub nurses, circulators, all of you guys need to know this just as well as sterile processing does. So one of the things that's obvious with peel pouches is you don't want to see any peel pouches that are punctured. One thing that we used to do when we'd open them is we'd hold them up to the light, look for holes and things like that, just like we would with blue wrap. Hopefully that's something that you might do as part of your practice, but you want to make sure they're not punctured. Another thing is there are a lot of different self-seal pouches out there. And so when when they're self-seal, you have to fold the flap at the bottom. And that picture to the left there is an example for you. So when they fold that flap, it's supposed to be nice and flat and provide a perfect seal. Hopefully you can tell from that picture that there's a lot of folds going on in there, leading to some, tunneling, if you will, and maybe some gaps in there that could allow for contaminants to enter the peel pouch. But it's kind of an interesting thing to see that if you've never been taught to look there, it might be very easy to overlook. So we wanted to provide a picture like that, especially that side profile, where you can really see an issue with a self-seal like that. That's something that you're going to want to look for. And another thing is with regular heat seal pouches. If you kind of look at that picture to the far right, in the right top corner, you're going to see a lot of wrinkling and things like that, even through the seal. And that, of course, is also an issue that could also provide a tunnel, a way for contaminants to get inside of the pouch. However, there's another issue with this picture, and as is common, there's a double peel pouch system being used there. And my guess is that part of the reason they're double pouching is because their seals aren't very good. And you can tell that because that inside pouch seal is broken through. It's totally open, and the handle of the instrument is kind of plowed through that seal. That's clearly a symptom that there is a larger problem going on, either with how the end user is using the heat sealing device. Are they using the correct temperature? Are they running it correctly? Are they being serviced? Is the peel pouch heat sealer being serviced correctly? All of those things start to come into question if you see this kind of thing. And if you're experiencing that in the operating room, that needs to be brought to people's attention, because peel pouches, even though we kind of take them for granted, these are sterile barrier systems. They are just as important as a rigid containment device or a blue wrap. They must be in working order, whether it's the peel pouch or the heat sealer itself. But as you can see, there's all kinds of things that we see, and that right below that picture, you have one where there's taping shut the entire peel pouch system. That is totally inappropriate. It should be either sealed with its self-seal or with a heat seal. And again, this makes me wonder, maybe they were having issues with their heat sealer or with their self-sealing technique, or maybe the object inside the peel pouch is just completely inappropriate to peel pouch. Maybe that should be better off inside a blue wrap or something like that. So a lot of things to consider when you deal with peel pouches. Another one is that in that lower right photo there, it's a photo of a load sticker. Melinda mentioned this earlier about having load stickers on everything. And in this particular one, you can see that the date is for 2012. All right. And my guess is, knowing Melinda, she probably took this picture rather recently. And so when we talk about expiration dates and things like that for peel pouches, wrapped items, anything like that, and even at Healthmark, we have peel pouches that are event related, and people get really excited about that, and they should. All right. But that does not mean that if your item has been sitting there since 2012, that there might be an issue with that item. Not necessarily that the packaging is bad, but now it's probably full of dust, which we have a picture of that to show you later. But there's a lot of issues, even including time, that can serve as your event that kind of negates the sterility factor or the storage of that item. So 2012, you're probably going to want to look into that item. Probably you won't use it. Probably whoever was using it may not even be working there anymore, that kind of thing. So definitely be looking for no creases, loops, wrinkles, shelf life dates, all that stuff, how it's labeled. Go ahead and to the next slide, Melinda.
All right, just letting you know, yeah, that was taken last month, by the
Yeah,
way.
there you go. I figured as much. Oh, there we go. Oh, another picture just popped up. So I'll speak to that one too. Um, this one, it looks like we have both, we have the writing at the bottom, and Melinda mentioned, you know, as long as the IFU allows for you to write on that sealed portion, that is okay. However, we also have a double pouching system going on there, and it looks like that inside pouch is folded, and we definitely want to stay away from folding the inside pouches. So if you see that as an end user, you should see it and be like, can't use it, and then move on to the next one. All right, go ahead. Some other things with peel pouches that you may or may not be aware of. All right, so in your facility, so looking at that top left picture, you might have odds and ends items, especially ortho's big for this. They always have random things that they need, or neuro has random things that they need, one-off things that they just would like to have peel pouch. And you know what? These random things, oftentimes nobody even knows what to call them. They don't know the proper name or whatever. So it's nice to have them in a peel pouch in a way, because you can just simply see inside of it and someone can recognize it as an item that is maybe needed. However, when you peel pouch items that are of odd shapes and weights and things like that, this one is pressing directly into the side of the seal of the peel pouch. There's no way to really contain that in there in a way that might not compromise that pouch. We want to take those things into consideration. So I would immediately, looking at this one, I would be concerned for the integrity of that pouch, and I would be skeptical of whether or not I could use it in the operating room. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the picture right below it, somebody tried to do the right thing there and open their scissors nice and wide open, which, you know, is great. For sterilization, we have to have our instruments in the open position. However, when it comes to sharp items like scissors, you know, tip protection, using some sort of accessory in order to protect the peel pouch. Again, it's a sterile barrier. You want to protect that pouch from being punctured even by the item that is inside of it, even if it's a small scissor like the one you see there. And another item that I want to point out is, obviously we talked about tape. So there's another item to the right of that was taped shut. That's definitely not something we want to see with peel pouch items. And then, of course, to the right of that, this one is a little bit maybe challenging to see a little bit, but I do want to point out that under that red circle there is a defect in the seal. It's really difficult to tell because you're talking about two different shades of blue, but this is something that you really should be looking for, because repeatedly in our consultative visits, we see over and over and over again that these heat seals that everyone needs to trust to provide a sterile barrier to their item, they get used a lot, and through that wear and tear, the seal can become not as good over time, especially if they're not being preventive maintenance properly and things like that. And if you have no quality check for it, you may not even notice it happening. All right, and these little defects, this one goes all the way through, but that defect probably started as a tiny one, and then over time it just kind of continued to grow and grow and grow into the beast of a defect that it is there. It is easy for me to see because my eyes are trained to see it. But for those of you in the operating room, that stuff that happens, you may not even be aware of it. So this is something that I was really excited to bring to your attention, because again, you're the last line of defense when you're opening that item to the sterile field or what have you. You need to know if the packaging that you're using has been in fact compromised. I remember opening packages before that seemed less resistant, and I was questioning in my mind, like, was that seal even intact? Was it any good? And it would make me nervous to use that item. So these might be reasons as to why you might experience that same thing. And then we have other issues there. Again, to the picture even further to the right, you have another fold inside of there. and you have double pouching going on. You have another item inside of there that looks like maybe doesn't have a tip protector, that kind of thing. So we have to be careful with these items. And then the picture just below that with the cord, it looks like it might be a camera inside of a peel pouch. Again, probably not the best system for packaging that kind of item. Might want to use something with blue wrap or a tray or a container, that kind of thing. So we want to make sure our instruments also have 1 inch from the edge of the peel pouch. And so those big bulky items, it's kind of hard to provide that 1 inch, especially with cords that kind of expand with when they're handled and all of that. So lots of things to keep in mind with peel pouches. Next slide, please. Oh, we have another example that just popped up here. Let's see what is going on with this one. We have our instrument in the open position. We have our indicator in there. We have tip protection in there. We have our labeling. We have our load sticker as well. And we have our self seal at the bottom. It kind of looks like maybe the inside item, the scissor, or whether that's a scissor or needle driver, probably a needle driver, it looks like, might be impacting that self seal at the bottom. So we want to make sure that that is not interfering with our seal. All right, next slide, please.
Yep. And Kevin, the other part to that too was the seal, and also it flipped like it should be flipped with the handles facing up.
Yes, for proper taking for the sterile field. So if you're handing off an item to your scrub tech, the idea would be to hand them the handle of the item first. So that's something to keep in mind when you're actually, for those of you who are sterile processing technicians that are listening in, is to actually load the item properly into the peel pouch in the first place.
Yeah.
All right, next slide. Thanks, Melinda.
Yeah.
All right, so some things with double pouching that you're gonna wanna remember is, you know, the orientation, number one. You wanna have it paper to paper, plastic to plastic. You're gonna have, one of the big things that we see sometimes is the mixing and matching of manufacturers of pouches. So you see that example to the far right, and again, actually on the bottom right as well. Both are examples of using 2 different manufacturers to double pouch. The reason we don't recommend that is because when pouch manufacturers validate their pouches, they don't crisscross with other manufacturers during that validation process. So maybe logically it seems like it should be okay to you because both are validated pouches. They were not tested or validated together. As such, you shouldn't use them that way. So that's something you want to stay away from. Another one is having the inner pouch not obstructing the seal of the outer pouch. So it needs to have enough room all the way around it so that the inside pouch isn't actually compromising the pouch of the outside one. So a good rule of thumb is to have 1 inch away from the edge around the outer pouch. So actually in the far right picture, around the sides at least, maybe not the top and the bottom, but around the sides, there's probably a good inch there. That part would be a good example. The bottom, maybe not so much. So those are some good takeaways there. Another thing too is that first picture on the left is you see a wrench in there. That's another one of those things where you worried about somebody maybe brought something from their toolbox for sterilization. We don't want to use that as an item in our sterile field. We want to have things that have actual proper IFUs, that are proper surgical instruments, as well as there's some other issues here. You know, you're going to want, hopefully you're using integrators. Melinda mentioned classes of indicators, and a class 5 integrator would be the appropriate choice there. And in this picture, there's only a class 1 inside of that. So lots of things to consider with peel pouches. Inner pouch should not be folded. That's another one. We do see that quite a bit for whatever reason. People maybe see that as a way to make it fit properly, or maybe maybe they're just in a rush. I don't know. Maybe they were trained improperly, that kind of thing. Those are the kinds of things we want to watch out for. Another thing that I'm noticing on this picture on the bottom here is that someone, it looks like maybe did those chevron cuts on there, but they might have did them a little too aggressively and caught off some of the edges. Those are nice things to do for the end user, but you want to make sure that your end user is able to open them properly and not cause any sort of damage to the peel pouch, like tearing or ripping of the plastic or the paper while in the process of opening them. All right, next slide, please. All right, back to Melinda.
All right. Sorry, I couldn't get the thing to move.
It's all
Technical
good.
difficulties. All right, so I get the fun part of talking about wraps. Yeah. So I'm not going to wrap for you because my skills are just not there. I wouldn't subject you to that. But I will talk to you about sterilization wraps. All right, so there are multiple different types of wraps out there, and we've all seen the main two components or categories is woven and non-woven wraps. These wraps, both of them have to be FDA cleared as medical sterilization packaging systems. And then also they have to include their IFUs to talk about how long they can be stored and their maintenance of them and information of the sort. You want to make sure that whatever wrap you're using, you're selecting the appropriate size, the appropriate shape and weight of the to fit the appropriate size, shape, and weight of the medical device that's being processed. So, you're trying to wrap something like a triangle knee positioner, right? You're not going to use, a small little wrap and just barely cover it. You need to make sure that you can properly do all the wrapping technique that needs to happen for that. So when we talk about woven, my mind always goes to like a woven sweater, right? It's something that's reusable. It's something that needs to be cleaned and laundered. It's used. It must be tracked. The usage of them must be tracked. You can see in our picture that we have that is a woven wrap. That is something that is reusable. It has to be inspected and laundered between cycles. Usually the validation for these is around 30 days shelf life. So after 30 days, they come down and be reprocessed. Then we have our non-woven, which is the more popular version. This is disposable, made out of polypropylene material. You have single or double bound wraps. So meaning it's a one layer, or for the most part, most facilities use there are two layers that are bound together. And that seems to be the majority. If you do use a single, just keep in mind that it has to have two wraps. So if it's a single layer, you have to put two of them together to wrap the item. They're designed to minimize shedding, damage. If they're damaged, they have to be discarded. If it falls on the floor before you're wrapping something or whatever, or it could fall on the floor after you sterilize it. You just really want to make sure you're inspecting for any damage and discard if it's not, if it is damaged. Sterilization life depends on the IFU. So some wrap IFUs say you can stay on the shelf for 6 months after sterilization. Some say 1 year. Kevin kind of touched on this about with peel pouches. Wraps have the same concept happening with them. Same thing, rigid containers. Yes, it's a rigid container, but it also has a filter in it. So what is your shelf life for those filters? Do they have any? So things that you want to make sure that are being checked. So proper wrapping technique, to me, this is really crucial. As a once again, as a person from the operating room, learned sterile processing and working in sterile processing over the years, understanding wrapping was a bit of an eye opener for me, and knowing the proper technique on how to wrap um, versus, what I used to see or what I used to do when I thought I knew. But so you want to make sure, like we said, we're choosing the correct size wrap. Excessive material, it's hard for the Sterile to reach the inside of that tray. You got way too much going on, too much piled on top of the wrap becomes a problem. The first flap, when we talk about like the first, it says look in step number 2, should completely cover the tray and go down to the back of the tray, but should not be tucked. Now, I see this all the time when I go into facilities. If I open a tray, as I'm, like Kevin was mentioning, we're doing a consultative practice review. We're checking. I open a tray and I find the wrap tucked. Especially true when you're doing something like a scope, right? A rigid scope, and they've got the wraps too big and they just tuck it all the way underneath. So the problem is, like, me as a scrub tech or as a circulating nurse, I grab that tab and I pull that, I risk that whole tray flipping over, which I actually seen happen with a Synthes tray. And all the screws for the Synthes small frag all went flying out of that tray because it flipped off the table. So definitely no tucking underneath the tray. Wraps cannot be placed inside rigid container or peel packs. We talked about that. And tape cannot be used inside a tray to hold your flaps. So we see this a lot, right? It Wrapping a tray is not as easy as it may look. It really takes some skill and practice to get it down. And as you can see in step number 3 in that picture, you need to make your folds, and holding those folds, sometimes those flaps, sometimes staff will use tape to hold that down. And the problem with that is, once again, like we said, tape is an outside containment device, not made for inside, right? And then the other problem is sometimes they'll put it down and they'll peel it up. Now we're compromising the integrity of that wrap. So we don't want that to happen as well. So you just got to use your limbs, what the good Lord gave you, right? Like your limbs, your leg. Don't use your legs. Don't put your legs up there. All right. Arms and stuff, elbows. All right. Your tape must be labeled with the contents and the date. So if you have a barcode, putting your barcode on, writing on the tape. So strongly recommend, even with the use of a barcode, that staff still label the tape, because those barcodes can come off. And if you need that tray in an emergency situation and you can't even identify it, we have a problem, right? You can see in these pictures, we have the process for wrapping. And this is basically out of the sterile processing HSPA book. And it's a really good illustration of how to wrap. So the key point that I want to point out here is that you can see in the picture with the circle, we got the tape exposed because somebody put tape holding the flaps on the inside. But the other part is we got that envelope concept happening. And we've all been taught how to wrap like that. You got your wrap going down to look like an envelope, it's pulled in. But we're leaving all of that edge of that tray unprotected with the amount of protection the middle has. So walking the wrap out, squaring it off with your tray and lining it up with your tray is truly the right way to wrap a tray. You're giving that tray the best amount of protection throughout all edges of those trays. And we know if there's going to be a hole, it's going to most likely be in the corners, right? So making sure that your tray is walked out, squared off, and wrapped correctly. Once again, this is a new process for a lot of staff. They've all been taught to do the triangle part. So if you see it, bring it up to the staff, educate the sterile processing, help bring it to their attention that this is, a better way to wrap the trays. So when we talk about wraps, we talk about holes, right? Because, hey, you got a wrap, you got a hole. This goes hand in hand. So when we talk about holes in wraps, a tiny little hole, you can see here that is 80 micrometers long, so or wide. You know, and if you look at something like Staphylococcus aureus, wow, that is only 1 micron. So you can imagine you can fit 80 little Staphylococcus straight across that hole. So, and then when we talk about the smallest size human can see with their unaided eye, it's 100 microns. So that's, I mean, when you take all these in consideration, and we're trying to make sure that we don't have holes in wraps, we need to do everything possible to protect those wraps. So this is part of education that Halyard actually provides for their wraps. So something identifying what the issue is with the wrap, right? So pressure cut looks like a knife, but has welded edges. Stacking trays and hanging off shelves can create pressure cuts. Then we also have our snag cut. So this is like loose fibers on the edge, resembles a triangle concept. This is from somebody taking the tray and pulling it off the shelf and dragging it. Proper way is you lift up the front part of the tray, you stick your whole forearm underneath that tray, lift it up and take it off the shelf. You don't just drag the whole tray off the shelf. And then we have pressure holes, welded edges, very small, sandwiched between trays. We see these a lot in the corners of our trays. And then we have our puncture holes, which are frayed edges. This can happen with like loose instruments. So this is, you know, you get a towel clip that is not secured onto your stringer and it punctures through, or a skin hook or something like that that's floating around. So some big notes for wrapped. So we've got our Goldilocks theme, too large, too small, or just right. So making sure that you have the right size. Over taping. All right, so we don't need to mummify the tray, right? So we don't want to tape it with too much tape. And then you can see this tray was never, it was processed multiple times and it was never rewrapped. It was just reprocessed and reprocessed, which gave us this brown color tape. So, and then we have tabs on our trays, right? So not creating tabs on disposable wraps. Reusable wraps, you want a tab because we want to encourage the peeling the tape off to open it. For disposables, the tape should be broken, never peeled, because once again, we destroy the integrity of the wrap. And we talked about our sizes and also what I like to refer to as dog ears. They're cute on the dog, but not on your wrap trays. So when you have a tray that's wrapped like this, these dog ears tend to pool the water or steam, and so creating wet trays. So once again, here we have this lovely example. So what's wrong with this picture? We got too much tape on it. Talked about mummifying your tray. Overlapping tape. So especially with Sterad or V-Pro tape should not overlap. I really suggest that you just facilities do not overlap tape, period, because it's kind of confusing for staff. Do I overlap this one? I can't overlap that one. So it's just a big no-no. Don't overlap, period. If one part of that tape underneath, the one square underneath doesn't turn, I mean, in all honesty, the OR has the right to say, when in doubt, throw it out, right? I didn't turn. I don't know if this went through sterilization process. So no tab to open aseptically. As you can see at the bottom picture, the tab to actually open the tray is taped down significantly. So you can't even pull that tab to actually pop the tape and open it. And then, you know, it says the endobrow tray, but it doesn't have any initials on it, who did it, what the date of it being processed was, so nothing written on it. Kevin, back to you.
All right, thanks, Melinda. So yeah, we're gonna get into rigid containers, which I actually enjoy talking about, and as we go through it, you'll kind of see why I think it's there's a lot of things that we overlook with rigid containers. Go on to the next slide, please. All right, and then so rigid containers, both for end users, so those of you who work in the operating room, and for those of you who work in sterile processing, because I know that we probably have a good mixed crowd today. One of the things that I cannot stand the most with rigid containers is the fact that they look so sturdy and they look so resilient. And so people who work in the OR and work in sterile processing routinely, they kind of get used to these things and don't think of them as an item that needs to be cared for. In fact, I've worked in sterile processing departments or toured through departments into the decontam area where you literally can't hold a conversation because the tech is literally whipping around rigid containers like they're nothing. And the noise level is just through the roof because they're banging and clanging and hitting them against case carts and cleaning racks and things like that. And it's absolutely maddening from a noise level standpoint, but also these, again, they're sterile barrier systems. And though they are made out of metal, they are very pliable. They're meant to be lightweight, so you can actually fit instruments in there and still get under that 25-pound recommended weight limit. So they're not really meant to put up with the punishment that we put them through on the day-to-day basis. And I don't care if you're in a hurry, and I don't care if there's pressure on you. You cannot throw these around because they're sterile barriers. They are meant to keep the content sterile. You are going to compromise them. They're very expensive assets. You can't just go out and buy a ton of replacements all the time. All right, and you can't afford to keep sending them out for repair. But some of the basics that I wanted to cover with this is that from an end user standpoint, is that one of the things that we're really good at, generally speaking, at least from my experience in the OR, we're really good at checking for holes in blue wrapped items. And some of us are pretty good at checking for holes in peel pouch items. But again, one of the things that we take for granted oftentimes are these rigid containers. Do we even look at the locks? Do we even notice if they're 100% locked or if there's a broken lock? Do we look at both of the filters on the top of the container? And do we know that sometimes there's filters in the bottom of the container? And those filters can be out of place, they could be the wrong type, they could have a hole in them, they might have an indicator on them, they might not have an indicator on them. There's a lot of things going on with these filters that we need to pay attention to. And then there's those filter plates that hold them in place. Those are another part of the puzzle that could fall off during sterilization or care and handling or transport and all of that. So those are things to look for. Another thing to look for, especially if you are on the sterile processing side, and of course in the operating room as well too, is that gasket. So in that lower right picture on the lid, if you flipped it over and you were looking at the underside, there should be a nice gasket that goes all the way around the lid. And if that gasket isn't there, or it's bent or damaged or something like that, then you have a compromised sterile barrier, which is a very big deal. Also, another thing with rigid containers is making sure that they're completely dry for the end user. Sometimes rigid containers, especially with how densely we pack them, sometimes it can be a little bit of a challenge to always have them completely dry. So those are things to look out for. And then stuff that might be in the bottom of them. We'd say to check for bioburden, but it could be anything. If you put your rigid containers on a storage shelf for any length of time, anything could fly in there. I've even seen flies fly in there and then they get trapped and they die in there, and now you have a fly in your tray. And so hopefully you're looking at these rigid containers, especially if they're being stored for any length of time before they're actually used. So those are some things to be looking out for. Next slide, please. Oh gosh, so this picture to the left is pretty interesting. I hope that you guys don't see this, but nonetheless, it made it into our presentation. So it does happen where people maybe don't have the locks. I know that we were actually, I don't know, it seemed like there was a global shortage on locking mechanisms for a little while there. Hopefully that has come and gone. Um, so in this case, they were using tape to tape this thing down and lock it in place. Clearly that is not meant to be the lock of choice for a rigid container and shouldn't be used as such. Then you have in that middle picture, it's hard to tell, but it looks like underneath that filter is kind of wrinkled. And if the filter is wrinkled and wavy and not lying flat against your top, you got a problem. I mean, that's definitely a direct point of ingress for contaminants. And then, of course, that picture on the right, this is exactly what I'm talking about. When you're throwing your containers around and all of that, it's really easy to look at a container like this one and think everything is fine. But if you look at it from the side like this, you can see, hopefully very easily with this picture, that part of the lid is bent upward and that the seal is completely completely open actually on that one side. And talk about, we don't even need a micron scope to see that thing is gaping open. So we have a major problem there. But you could see how in a busy operating room scenario, it would be very easy to overlook that. You see the locks, you break them, open the lid, and away you go. So these are things that you should really be keeping in mind. And then we're going to go back to Melinda for storage and releasing trays.
Yeah, so I know we're getting short on time, so I'm going to skim through this one really quick as it possibly can. So hot trays, when we're talking about releasing hot trays, it's a big no-no. So trays need to be cool to room temperature prior to releasing them to the operating room. So if you're looking for a tray and turnover and they're like, no, we can't release it because it's too hot, that's why. So, and the reason for that is because of how your wraps work. So your wraps, sterilization wraps, peel packs, and filters, they all work the same. So if you think about like your face, the pores on your face, when you clean your face, you use hot water to open the pores, and then you use cold water to close your pores, right? And so same thing that happens with your wraps. When it reaches a certain temperature, all those little dots that you see there are pores that open, allow the steam to enter inside. And then when it cools down to room temperature, those pores will, a certain temperature, those pores close and creates that seal. So why is that a problem? If you do not let that tray seal and you touch it with your hands, or that peel pouch cool down in time, you touch it with your hands, which has a whole bunch of microorganisms on it, you're just transferring those microorganisms onto that warm hot tray and they're going to wick inside. So we don't want that to happen. We don't want that contamination concept to happen. The other thing is condensation, right? So you go from a tray that's been sterilized in 270-degree temperature, and it comes out, it's around 100 and some degrees, and then you take it right into a 60-degree room, we got a big problem. So on average, wrap trays can take up to 3 hours, depends on the density of the tray and how big and how much stuff is in it. Rigid sterilization trays can take up to about an hour and a half for cooling. And then peel packs could take up to 30 minutes. So sometimes it could be faster, but having a temperature gun to really verify that temperature is a nice way to say, nope, okay, we'll let it go in another 10 minutes. It'll be at the right temperature. It's only at 100 degrees right now. So wet packs and wet loads, just understanding wet packs and wet loads and what's the difference and how they play a part. You have something that's wet, a tray that's wet, that's one item. What do you have to do? You have to recall everything in that load. You have to open if it's a mixed load, you open a wrap tray, you open a container, and you open a peel pouch. And if any of them are wet, then you now have what's considered a wet load. If it's non-mixed, then you open 3 of the larger items on on that wrap or on that set or load. And if any of them are wet, it's a wet load versus a wet tray. Storage. So these are some issues with storage that we see, big no-nos. So objects on top of sterile trays, peel pouches stuffed into bins, wraps exposed to UV lights, rigid container on top of wrap trays, and excessive numbers of stacked trays. And by the way, all of those were for one case. That's when I actually managed a sterile processing department. That was one case. It was a screw removal. Anyway, so just big no-nos for storage of your wrap trays and peel pouches, rigid containers, things to pay attention to. Some more things is pouches hung. I've seen, there's a lot of talk about how do we store, especially Da Vinci arms and stuff like that. Hanging a pouch, these pouches are not really validated to be hung like that. And you wind up breaking the polymer chains that make up the construction of those pouches. And you start weakening those polymer chains and starts destroying the pouch a little bit more. So really want to refrain from that. Trays stored on their side, big no-no. They need to be flat. Locks missing, make sure you have locks. Peel pouches under rigid trays, which is you're not allowed to be doing that. And then wrap trays, items shoved inside the folds of a wrap tray. So we see this a lot with facilities that don't put their count sheets in their trays. They tend to hang them on the outside, tape them to the outside, and then, or they shove them inside the folds or something like that. So here's another example. So Kevin was kind of touching on this, dust on the peel pouches in storage. So dust in your bins, and you can see this lovely peel pouch. He grew a fur coat. And so we just want to make sure that we're paying attention to these items as well. Things to do right? So storage, sterile items should be stored under environmental controlled conditions in a manner that reduces the potential for contamination. So you have multiple different shelving systems out there that allow for trays to be not stacked on top of each other. They are aseptically able to be presented correctly. When they're sterilized, they don't get stacked, they don't get thrown around, or so there's different options out there. So explore your different options, what's best for your facility for storage. Kevin.
All right, let's move on to the next slide and we'll get these last few slides in real quick. So
Yeah.
regarding transport, you guys, sterile processing techs, OR technicians, all of you nurses, this is stuff that we need to be watching out for. The pictures like this, where you worked all that hard time and effort on building trays for specific cases. In this case, these are a bunch of loaner trays, and then someone comes around and plops on a really heavy item right on top of it. That's just one example, but I've seen people carry around peel pouches in their pocket or under their arm, in all kinds of things. So this is the kind of I guess do's and don'ts, if you will, of transporting and utilizing these items. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So carts, one of the things that you want to pay attention to is in both of these pictures, we have bottom shelves, and those shelves are solid. So that's one thing you want to keep in mind, especially if you're storing any instruments for any length of time. Housekeeping has to come through at some point with a wet mop of some sort, and we want to protect our sterile trays from that, from anything from the cleaning process. And the other thing here, obviously on the right, is all of that stacking, which Melinda also showed you in the storage side of things, but it also applies to transport. If you have a beautiful storage area and then you take them off the shelf to transport them, and you choose to transport them like this, then you have problems. You're going to compromise those trays and worse off the patient. So next slide, please. So talking specifically about in the operating room, you can go on to the next slide. I just want to emphasize this inspection point because sometimes people are really, really good about it, and they inspect everything very well and almost with a fine-tooth comb, which I think that you should. But there are people out there that don't, or there's certain things that inspection points that they overlook, and we tried to mention all of them as we went through this, whether in regards to peel pouches or the labeling on any of these types of containment devices, whether it's blue wrap, rigid containers, and peel pouches. They all should be labeled. They all should be free from any tears, any broken locks, any filter problems, all of those things. No condensation, all of that. So next slide, please. And during the opening process, I do want to just spread a word of caution, because I've seen so many different people open sterile rooms, and there's a wide variety of practices. I've seen people open sterile items literally all over the room because they thought it would be more efficient. And the problem is that can be really hard to, one, navigate, just moving around in the room and try and keep everything sterile. But it's also a burden on your scrub to check all of those things, hold on to those things, and while you're checking the sterile wrapper, and then trying not to contaminate something around you. You know, utilizing tray carrier accessories. A lot of times we put these blue wrap items on trays so that we can protect them. And then you go in the operating room and people take them right off and slam them right onto a metal ring stand. Some of those ring stands have sharp edges. We want to make sure that we're not doing stuff like that. And I've even seen people open up huge total joint trays directly to the field. They're literally like peeling the wrap over and setting it onto the sterile field, which is just mind-blowing to me. You should never, ever, ever, ever do that. So unfortunately, there are lots of questionable things that happen, especially as people get experience and they kind of get cavalier with their environment. But these are things that we should be watching out for and not doing, and watching our peers and making sure that everything is intact and everything is sterile for our patient. And I think with that,
Yep.
that should wrap it up.
Sure.
Sorry we went over a little bit. You
We
know, we like
did.
talking here at Healthmark, and so I hope you guys got a lot out of it, regardless of going over a little bit.
Thank you, Melinda and Kevin. Yes, we unfortunately have gone over our time. We've had lots and lots of questions come in, Kevin and Melinda, so I will be sending them to you later today, so you can answer them offline at your own convenience. So thank you once again, the both of you, for your time today and for such a great and really informative presentation. Please visit today's sponsors website, hmark.com, to learn more about the products that they provide to the industry. As promised, the answer to today's trivia question is Clara Barton. So congratulations to our first winner, Mary Ritchie. A quick reminder, you can obtain your CE certificate by completing the post-webinar survey, which will be emailed 1 hour after the completion of today's webinar. You must complete the survey to receive your certificate, and you'll be able to download the certificate directly from your computer once the survey is submitted. If you have any questions, you can reach us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Please visit ortodaywebinars.live for more details of all our upcoming webinars and complimentary registration. So thanks once again for sharing this great webinar with us. We hope to see you again next time, and enjoy the rest of your day.